Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your leadership. Look, I think that what's going on in the energy revolution in the United States of America is one of the great news stories, and maybe the news story of the 21st century. From the exports reaching 10 million barrels a day to export of LNG and shifting that entire industry, and then as a combat veteran, which my colleagues have heard me say on this committee, I can't tell you how many veterans, how many wounded warriors we have in Walter Reed, how many we've lost hauling diesel fuel across exposed supply lines, getting IED'd when many of those outposts, and in fact many portions of our military can and should be existing on renewables. So one of the things that I'm most excited about is solar, and where Florida is going with solar. One of my first visits was to a solar site that's built by Florida Power and Light, and its drive to have 30 million panels by 2030 with 10 gigawatts of electricity. I'm proud to say Florida has eclipsed California now in Q1 of 2019 with the most solar power installations for #1 in the country for new panels, and in the next 5 years should be #1 across the board. So I think the Sunshine State is living up to its name. My question, Mr. Secretary, is how do you see the department really sustaining the private sector growth? And as a conservative, I love it that it's the private sector leading the charge on this, but obviously it's a state issue, and Governor DeSantis has been a real leader. How do you see the department continuing to really embolden and empower the private sector, and particularly in solar, but renewables writ large?
Well, I look at our role as from the standpoint of continuing to fund the opportunities to have public-private partnerships, the commercialization of innovation and technology that's coming out of our national labs, for instance. I think a governor and a legislature in a particular state would be wise to look at ways for that to give incentives to companies to risk their capital, working with their universities, for instance, which is where, by and large, your state's innovation and technology will come from. Looking for ways to partner up with the DOE, where you have the trifecta, if you will, of the state, the federal, and the local working together on some of these projects. So, and a great example of this, Florida Power just announced a 491 megawatt utility battery. I mean, that's massive. I mean, we're talking, and so with what you're doing on solar, and by the way, just for the record, solar just bypassed hydro, or was it, isn't that right? Solar just bypassed hydro as a total deliverer of power in this country. I mean, it's just some, you know, the wind, the solar side of things are really making some good progress. And battery storage is, I think, as we talked about earlier, the holy grail of this.
Mr. Secretary, just in the interest of time, I'm glad that you mentioned resiliency. Again, my predecessor in this seat, now Governor DeSantis, has announced a chief science officer and is going to announce a chief resiliency officer. If there's anything I hear about from constituents, it's traffic and flooding. I've joined the National Flood Coalition. Where do you see, I know you mentioned a bit earlier, where do you see the department's help in resiliency issues? And then, and just in the interest of time, if I could ask you to submit for the record, I know you mentioned the 17 labs. We've talked a lot about it. DOD also has 63 labs, and I'd be interested for the record how you coordinate. I mean, that's a lot of activity, and we need to spend those dollars efficiently, and just how you coordinate. And then also expanding the scope of ARPA-E. And I think if we get into some other areas like nuclear waste disposal and other things, then it may be more palatable across the board in terms of funding that organization.
And so let me back up here and just hit a few of the lights of what you talked about. I think coordinating between agencies is really important. And one of the ways to do that is actually to show up and to know what other agencies are doing, rather than just kind of staying siloed in your own. I'm going to DARPA tomorrow to talk to them about some of the things that they're doing, some of the ways that we can partner with them, and quite frankly, to make sure that, you know, they're not duplicating some things. I think Paul did a pretty good job earlier to talk about, you know, we kind of got different missions,
Right.
DOD and DOE, but to make sure that we're not, and the resiliency side of what, you know, we talked about, Caesar is really important in that we are the agency that has the responsibility for the reliability in the electrical sector. That's to make sure that the lights come on and it's protected. That is the DOE's responsibilities. Other agencies have some areas that kind of come in on the fringes, but DOE, that's their baby, making sure that we have that reliability, that resiliency in the electrical grid. So we're doing everything that we can, using those computers to model. And let me finish up by saying that the modeling side of what DOE is doing on the environment is going to pay, I think, some great dividends to your state, those states with those low-lying areas that are seeing flooding occurring, seeing the effect of this changing climate that we live in. And so, you know, I think these are some important goals and roles of which DOE is.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm on Armed Services as well, so I certainly appreciate that coordination. And Madam Chair, I yield my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you,